Hello and welcome back to the Magic Mindfulness Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Hupp, and I have a very special guest with me today, Yvonne Stoltzfus. And Yvonne is the founder of The Pleasure of Healing. So welcome, Yvonne.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. So let me tell our listeners a little bit about you. Yvonne is an author, artist, and creative leader, a certified spiritual director with nearly 3 decades of lived experience in home and hospitality. Yvonne's soulful work infuses wisdom with practical guidance. Through her writings, teachings, and heart-centered workshops, she invites a sense of beauty in the ordinary, seeing the natural world with fresh eyes. And Yvonne recently wrote a book about her relationship with her mother and her relationship with herself. It's called The Pleasure of Healing. And I had the pleasure of reading this book while I was on vacation last week. And so just wanted to thank you for your generosity in sharing that gift with me and your vulnerability and your gift with the world.
Thank you. It feels really good to get it out there.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. So I feel like we have a lot in common, although we may pursue slightly different paths. We both work with women, in a sense, guiding them back home to themselves. So I work through this pathway of yoga, teaching women to trust their inner guidance, to trust their inner wisdom, to make time out of their busy day for themselves, and to realize that they are not last. We can't give from an empty cup. And it seems like to a certain extent, you kind of guide women down a similar path, but maybe down a different way. Does any of that resonate with you?
Yes, it really does. And I think there's so many ways to come back home to ourselves. For me, in my personal experience, setting up a little corner in my bedroom about a decade ago, very simple, but I have been showing up there for about a decade, and that really has been a transformation for me. It's just a place where my nervous system settles. It's part of my morning routine. So that's something I feel pretty passionate about, women creating a sacred space in their home, a corner just for you. So that's one facet. And then I also think that, we can come home to ourselves through community and through conversations, even such as this, where we see pieces reflected back to us, where we hear other people's stories and we don't feel so alone or out of the ordinary. And I think for me right now, those are the two places that I'm addressing with women.
And I love how you mentioned that about the sacred space in your home. For my practice, I do a daily mindfulness practice, daily meditation practice. And so at first, it was that daily practice, that daily ritual of rolling out my yoga mat, of having a place to sit, of coming to that same place every single morning. So that did become like a sacred ritual for me. And
Mhm.
now that I've done it for so long, I feel like I can carry that piece within me. So even when I'm
Mm.
traveling, even when I don't have necessarily access to my yoga mat, I feel like I carry a bit of that sacred space within me. And so it's like coming home to that space, whether I'm in my physical environment or not. But there's
Mhm.
just something so nourishing about having that daily practice, that daily touch in with yourself.
Yeah, it really begins to build muscle memory. I think, like anything else in the world, when we continue to show up in kind of the same way, it like in the physical, you begin to build muscle. And the way I've experienced that is similar to what you're saying. I can be sitting in a room, and if I really become still within myself, I can feel my body, my nervous system settling into that same place where the pit of my stomach, gets more smooth, or I realize I'm clenching my jaw or my stomach, and then just allowing myself a little more space usually can soften those areas. And that has definitely come through showing up in that place every morning. It's something I truly look forward to. Sometimes I wish it was the morning again, um, because it's just such a welcoming place to meet myself.
It really is. And I taught a yoga class this morning, and my theme for the class was kind of similar to what you were just talking about, how there's this transformational power in stillness. There's this power in slowing down and finding that stillness within, connecting to that stillness within, and even building up that self-awareness, like you said, when you're clenching your jaw or when your mind is wandering, when you're not present with yourself or your loved ones. And the daily practice of coming back to ourselves, we're able to do it more and more as we move throughout our day-to-day world too. I feel like there's this ripple effect.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's so much more simple than we make it. It's not really another thing to do. It's just a few moments to be. And I'm coming to the place where I don't even want any agenda with it, not even like certain words I bring. For me, I take a cup of tea, or you could take a cup of coffee, and I always light my two candles. I have some artwork that I can see visibly from my chair that is significant to me right now. Like I'll change that if it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't become significant, but it's nice to change it as I'm changing. So having that space be very current and up to date, and then just showing up. There doesn't have to be an agenda to it per se. And even a length of time, I when we hear pause or slowing down, it's I think our first response is, I don't have time for that.
You're so right. It is.
And really, it's just a pause. It's only that. It's not saying hang up your job, your life, your kids, your work. It's just saying, can we balance that a little bit with a little more pause? And I think we all can agree we're way out of balance. So much action. And this is just a bit of a call, an invitation to come back into um, the counterbalance, which is inaction for just, you know, 15 to 20 minutes is ideal. But if you have 5, go with 5.
Exactly. I always tell people to meet yourself where you're at. When I started meditating, I literally committed to 1 minute a day, just sitting there for that 1 minute. Once you're there, you can stay longer. But
Mhm.
it's just getting into that daily habit at first and then see what naturally evolves. And it does. It's a process. It evolves, it changes over time.
Mhm.
Um, and I work with so many women, and I've experienced this myself too, where we're in this habit of just go, 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 do, do, do. How much more productive can I be? How many things can I check off of my to-do list? And I found myself in a similar situation to what you were saying, where I was like, I don't have time to slow down. I don't have this
Mhm.
time to take for myself. But what I have found is that by giving myself those few moments of presence, I'm able to show up more balanced and more aligned as I move throughout my day. And so the tasks that I do choose to take on, I feel like I'm coming from a place where my energy is full. I'm not
Mhm.
coming at it from a place of depletion. And so I don't know, it seems almost counterintuitive that you can slow down and still be productive.
Yes, and I think we would call that trust. And it's something, I butt up against a lot. I can be pretty ambitious in my day, and I like to feel like I'm accomplishing certain tasks. There's, fulfillment in checking them off. But really, I think it's just balancing the masculine and the feminine. And we live in a very masculine driven world. So that bit of pause it's very subtle. So when you're sitting there, you're feeling into the subtleties. You might find, emotion rises. You might find that you can name, I feel frustrated, I feel angry, I feel excited. Um, and so those are all, you're just teasing out the subtleties. And yeah, I think that we're going to be finding the whole world is turning more and more towards that. You can begin to see it. I see it around in languaging, even marketing, even large corporate things or TV ads or things like that. It really seems like we're all pointing towards, remembering to take a breath. Or I said the word remembering. I like to think of that as re-membering. We're putting ourselves back together. And that definitely needs a slower pace to do that. So yeah, it can come in many ways. And nature's, I think, by far the best teacher. Just sitting in nature or observing nature automatically slows our nervous system because
It does.
we're synced.
Yes, I have a yoga deck outside and I have a meditation stone outside. So whenever the weather allows, I like to take my practice outside to,
Mhm.
like you said, it's just so soothing. And yeah, that I like how you said remember too, like putting ourselves together.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's work that, no one else is going to do for us.
That is
It's
certainly true.
yeah, yeah, full responsibility there. I feel just to kind of turn a corner a little bit, I feel like when we're not taking those places of self-nurturing, then we do kind of project that out and expect that someone else would know what we need. Like, don't you see I need help? Can't you see I'm overwhelmed? Those kinds of thoughts that are more leaning towards a resentment. And I feel like our radiance is really in that pause. And so there's like a larger scope to this than just a pause. It's actually better for everyone around you, for the atmosphere, for your environment. Everyone will benefit when we're more regulated, I think is what it comes down to, self-regulating.
Yes, you're so right. And there's so
Mhm.
many different practices. So I like how you said earlier that you can come to this practice without an agenda. You don't have to use any certain words or phrases. You can just show up exactly as you are, and the practice meets you where you're at on any given day. And it builds such self-awareness, such self-trust, so that we can show up for ourselves. We can show up for the people around us, but we can show up in our authenticity as who we are and express our needs in a more aligned and balanced way so that we can get the support we need. We can ask for the support we need without assuming people know, without us
Mhm.
telling them. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I still find it difficult to really ask for what I need. But sort of a shortcut for that is to give myself what I need, like what I want to be asking for. Can I give that in some measure back to myself? And that's just sort of something to play around with. And I do believe that we kind of teach out of what has worked for us. And I really believe also in like this corner, this sacred space being free of clutter. So I offer a declutter and design consultation where, we'll assess a place in your home. It can just be a corner of a room or preferably one room, one small room in your house that we can work towards decluttering and updating to up-to-date version of who you are so that when you get to that space, you feel really good. And like I would venture to say, yoga met you in that way. When you got to that place, you feel really good. So there's so many variations of this, but we speak out of what has worked for us. And I love interior design. I love the color on the walls. So that is something I'm excited about offering other women. And I have a link on my website where, we can just set up a time to talk together and really work that program through. And it doesn't have to be much. That's the other thing. Sometimes we think, well, if I had a bigger house, then I'd have an extra room, or, when the kids leave, I'll do this and that. But these habits work best if they are ingrained in us ahead of time. Like when you're 35, 40, 45, you're still working with what is a familiar way in your body, your mind. By the time you hit menopause, there's some reckoning there. And I would love to catch women before that so that we've have these habits, these routines kind of ingrained in our daily living ahead of time.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that because I have found the same experience. Like setting up my little meditation corner with the lights and the little mirror and the little altar and these things that bring you joy and have meaning and make you feel nourished and supported and cozy and comfortable and loved. And having that space is so valuable And my house is 700 square feet, so I can totally
Wow.
relate to what you're saying. I don't have a room, I have a corner, and it's
Yes.
all I need. I mean, I do go
Mhm.
outside as often as possible, but
Yeah.
yes, that declutter and design, when I was first starting my practice years ago, that would have really come in handy. I started Googling, like, how do you set up a meditation corner? How do I set up? And so having somebody to walk you through it, that would be so valuable to set up a space that meets you where you are right now.
Yes. And sometimes we really do, it's like it'll just make it easier to have someone who is neutral about all the things you have in your space, kind of guiding you through that. Because we can get almost tunnel visioned, I think, or just miss the larger picture when we live in a space and become familiar with it. We don't even always see what's around us.
No, you're
So,
so right. And earlier you mentioned, the sense of community and the sense that I don't know, as a woman, I feel very valued. I feel very supported when I see somebody who can meet me where I'm at, where I can see
mhm.
somebody who has been down a similar path, when I know that I'm not going through this alone, or that I haven't been through this alone, or that other people are experiencing the same things in their day-to-day life that I have either gone through or I'm going through. And so it sounds like your services are really helping to um, create a space where we can declutter not only our physical environment, but maybe a little bit of our heart space and mental space as well.
Yes, yeah, that's so important. We hear a lot of talk about being present or living in the now, and that's just not a snap of the finger and you end up in that present moment. We really do have to sift through things that don't belong, conditioning that we've been given. Sometimes we're just following someone else's drum beat for us or someone else's script. And I that too, you have to slow down a bit to be able to even differentiate what is yours and what is someone else's, that you're carrying, into your daily life. And I think that even these simple practices of yoga or sitting in nature or having a corner just for you, it's all lending towards really finding that point of satisfaction for you where you are living authentically to who you are, to the purpose that you were given. And of course, our past teaches us, but it's not necessarily meant to be our future. We want to carve out the life that we want to live, the life that we're intended to live. So I feel like that declutter is not just in the physical, it touches on, our emotions and some of our mental beliefs and all of that. So yeah, it's really important work.
It is. And that's certainly been my own experience. I, got this corporate job, started climbing the corporate ladder, bought a big to me house, and
Mm.
I wasn't fulfilled. I was stressed beyond belief. And I've realized finally through this self work, through the self reflection, through pausing and sitting with myself, that this was a dream. It wasn't mine. I guess I
Mm.
just thought, you go to college, you get a good job, you buy a big house. And
Mhm.
I got there and I was so um, just unsatisfied, unfulfilled. And so I started practicing the yoga and the meditation. I started teaching the yoga
Mm.
and the meditation. I bought a tiny little cabin in the woods. I got a much
Mm.
less stressful job. And, it's been kind of an unraveling of figuring out, okay, somehow I ended up down this path that wasn't aligned for me, that didn't feel balanced for me. But by, the mental decluttering, the physical decluttering, when I moved, I got rid of probably 75% of my belongings and haven't
Wow.
replaced them. And so it's just so freeing, so liberating, um,
Mm.
to find your way to a path that brings you back home.
Wow, yeah, you're exemplifying that for all of us. That is a very courageous path. And it's doable. We talk about it, or maybe we think it's not doable for us. But it really is. And there you are. You took action towards it. I could talk about that. I would love to hear more about that, how you went from the big house to the 700 square feet. But oddly, it can be more satisfying. And not to say everybody has to do that, but that's
No.
really great. I love that story.
Yeah, and it's really just about, learning who you are at your heart, your core
Mhm.
values, and what you were talking about the masculine and the feminine energies before, and I feel like I was stuck in that masculine flow, and I didn't
Mhm.
have enough of the feminine energy in my day-to-day life to help to balance that out, even to slow down and tap into my intuition and trust myself to follow my own path. And I feel like so many of us have experienced that in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm. Yeah, because that feminine is very subtle and very soft, and it just takes some relearning to even be able to identify that place in us, um, because it's not what we've seen modeled even around us. So, but wow, it is so valuable, and to trust yourself, to keep. I find it's a lot of trial and error. I still have to try things, even if in my gut, I think probably there I said my gut, I think. Um, you can see how
Yeah.
that's working out. Um, it takes practice. Again, it's like that muscle memory. And usually, we do know well in advance. Our body has sent us signals if this is good for us or not. But I don't know. I find I still have to try things out.
Yep.
And then I come back to like, yeah, I think I knew the truth of that ahead of time. But that whole trial and error thing can actually become fun. I'm finding that to be a bit more enjoyable than just the stress of challenges. It's like, okay, where am I coming out on that? How does that feel in my body? And if I take this action, you know, does it lead to more stress? Do I feel more ease? And it's not like these are all just conscious questions, but that's sort of the gift of honing that more feminine intuition. And again, it's showing up a little differently for each of us. So we can all send little pointers or tips, but really it's your body showing you your way. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that connection between your gut and I think, because I find myself doing the same thing. And I have to, it's a constant practice of like, okay, I sense, I feel, I intuit, I know, I trust, but then I'm going to try to think my way out of it or make it more logical.
Yeah, yes. And it very easily complicates things. But, again, we're living in this physical body and there is a lot coming at us. So I think we just have to be very kind and gracious with ourselves as we're learning. But the main thing is are we learning, or are we just staying in this pattern of really having revved up energy? And at some point, our body no longer cooperates and it shows up sometimes as dis-ease. Disease is dis-ease, and our body has been telling us for a while that it's not doing great, but we just kind of keep revving ourselves up. So yeah, it's a lot to live in this human body.
It is.
It really is.
It really is. And I think that's why, the services that you offer are so valuable, just giving women this sacred space to return to practice over and over again, to return home, to come back to yourself, and to find that power in the daily pause.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting how, fast forward a decade, and I don't know when you left your corporate job to where you are now, but again, I'm just going back to the simplicity of these practices and how they can reshape our whole life. The start of that practice in my bedroom is what has allowed me to write this book or start these, the business that I'm now entering into. It really came out of a very simple need to, what I used to feel is just that it's just too noisy. There's just too much. And I didn't realize or have the language that I was really overstimulated. I have a, highly sensitive, empathic kind of system. And I didn't realize I was taking in so much of other people's um, emotions, or just how they were feeling, and thinking I was probably at fault for how they were feeling, I'll say. Like I had a lot of guilt around that. and almost like a contortionist. How can I make you feel better? All of that stuff just made me feel like I have to have somewhere that it's quieter. And that led me down the path, like a more contemplative path. Um, but even that, I'm not saying we have to live a quiet contemplative life. That seems, I have to have a portion of that now in my daily life to do well, to thrive. But again, it's not like a script that everybody has to follow that. We just have to kind of realize where we're at. And I just find the world to be incredibly noisy, and even more so with all the social media things. That's another thing I like to say in this sacred space is to bring your bare feet, your empty hands, and your open heart. Really to not bring any technology into that space or be attending to any work in that space. That in itself is revolutionary, just to have a place where you're not, where you're not bringing that in with you can be very life-changing.
And I'm so with you in the sense that the world around us is just so noisy. And it's not like, I don't know, we almost feel like we have to be always on call, or if somebody texts you and you don't get a response in like 5 minutes, they're like, are you okay? Where are you? And giving yourself that permission to say, no, I'm setting these boundaries. My care, my self-care is important. My time for myself, my time with myself is important.
Mm-hmm.
And creating that sacred space to come back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned your book, so I'll detour back to
Mm-hmm.
that if that's okay, because I had the
Yeah.
pleasure of reading it last week. And one of the first things that really stood out to me is just how beautiful it is, how much love was poured into it. Like, it's not only a good read, but it's a fun read. Like, you're vulnerable, but like you can tell you put so much heart and love into this book. Would you like to share a little bit about it with our audience?
Yeah, I would. First of all, maybe just holding up the cover because
Yeah.
um, I sort of like to use that cover as an
Oh,
example that is actually a closet. It's probably 5 by 10, I'm gonna say. When I had more kids than bedrooms, my daughter, it was like that closet was empty. So, we just took out what was in there and she made that her space, and now she's moved out. So it's just a place that I can sit and look outside. So I kind of like to use that as an example because it looks lush. I have green plants hanging and things like that, but it's a very small space. But going into the book itself, I I think at the heart of it, it really is about like healing the ancestral mother line. What I carried in part was what emotions from my mother, which she carried from her mother. So by writing this book, I really went very deeply into that for myself. I was hugely aware of the kind of the tension between my mother and I, just energetically. She was actually a delightful person, and on the surface, we didn't have like a volatile relationship at all. She was a beautiful person, but it was how I experienced her. And I needed more emotional nurturance, which she did not have available to her to give to me because she herself needed that. So that's what the book is about. And then really at the end, just rewriting that narrative. And so that rewriting the narrative for me is that I can mother myself. I can emotionally nurture myself with the nurturance that I wanted from her. So again, we're coming back to that space and how I hold myself, how I can just let being me be okay now. I don't have to put a lot of labels on it. It takes me a long time to process through things, to process through emotions, to process through the feel of a room. And so the book was that same kind of process. It took me a long time. It took me very deep. But what I love is that it came up with the end result is a ton of simplicity. And that's what I love best about it. Just the pictures. I think it's very calming to travel through the story. So yeah, in the end, it reflected back a lot to me. And I think creativity is always doing that. When we give ourselves to creativity, it's really a gift that gives back. And the book was a prime example of that. So
Yes.
thanks for letting me share that.
Oh, yes. Thank you for sharing it with me. And I mentioned before we started recording that my mother passed away about 2.5 years ago. And so for me, I could relate to a lot of what you were talking about, and also found myself in a similar situation where I got along great with my mom, but I felt like there was this level of nurturance that I wanted and didn't get, and maybe that she wanted and didn't get. And so
Mm.
seeing that I'm not alone in that and that somebody else has experienced that too, was very healing.
Mm.
But yes, this book, will link to it in the show notes so that if any of our listeners or anybody who's watching it here want to purchase their own copy, they can get that at the link on your website.
Yeah. Yes, I'm looking for just a little page to read a bit from. And I appreciate you sharing your story about your mother because um, I think that relationship is one of the primary relationships in our lives, the mother-daughter relationship. And so we all have our own experience of that. And I find it very fascinating to hear people's mother stories. Yeah. And then how we're mothering our daughters as well. And I'll just read a little bit here about a sense of self. Take your interior home through a restoration process. Bring it back to its original charm. Pretend, act as if the world doesn't need you to save it. Sit cross-legged on the grass. Pretend you're off the hook for 15 minutes or 15 hours. Walk barefoot. Paint a wall or your lips. Shine. No one else can do this for you. Aliveness is contagious. So is resentment. Light a candle, not a spotlight. A gentle touch opens up more easily than probing. Take as long as you need. Keep what you want. Let go of what you don't. Find a way. Create while no one is looking. Share what you can. Build a harbor, a safe place to land. Bring yourself in from the cold. So that's just one place. And then I'll go down to the bottom there. How does it feel to stand? Standing on your own 2 feet, I grow a sense of self.
Yes, I love that. And I love how, like you said, the practices that you share are so simple but profound.
Mm.
I talk a lot about, I don't know, the wealth or the freedom that comes from simplicity because I have a tendency to try to overcomplicate things. My mind wants to make things more difficult than they are. And walking outside barefoot, taking 15
Mhm.
minutes to yourself,
Mhm.
these are simple practices that we can do to help us find out who we are again or reconnect, remember, like you said, who we
Mhm.
are.
Yeah, I definitely have that same complication of my mind, and it's very real. It's how my mind works. It's a gift, but it's also sometimes the shadow or the challenge. And we almost need the seed of that complexity to find our way to simplicity. And I'm learning to respect that about myself and my process. So, you and I may share that over complicating things, but we all have those gifts and those challenges that are not meant to just be eradicated. They're really there to point the way. And I'm fascinated by how you scaled down to 700 square feet. So you went through that complication to the place of simplicity to find the gift of, just being who you are.
Yes, yes. And I'm glad you mentioned that about the challenges because they are a pointer towards joy. They lead us, they're guiding us in the direction of our heart's desires, or guiding us to learn something that will take us deeper, or it hasn't been an easy process. And many of us deal
Mhm.
with loss and challenges, and we come through it I don't know, I'm very sensitive as well. And it takes me a long time to process things. And I like to go deep. And instead of like avoiding them, feel into them and let them process until they're ready to release.
Yeah.
But there's no rushing the process. And that's hard to sit with sometimes,
Yeah.
hard to accept.
It is. It is. We put so much pressure on our ways of being because I don't know who set the time, the time clock to say we're supposed to know our answer in 5 minutes flat, or we're supposed to be able to, like you said, respond to a text in 5 minutes with an answer if that date's going to suit or if that engagement is going to work out for us, and we really have constructed time in a sense. So it's not easy to live out of the construct of time, but it is okay for it to take a while to know where we come out on something, even to find words. That's something else in the book. I really wanted words to be few or sparse because I just get overwhelmed with words. I don't always know how to articulate what I want to say. And, it just, that too takes time to communicate, to find what the essence of what we really want to say. And sometimes just all the rush and the hurry just feels like it's taking us backwards more than forwards. So I think I'm getting a little bit off path on saying that, but just coming back into that place of, that sense of self, all those things I listed in there are ways to come home to ourselves, to come back to ourselves and remember.
Yes, I love that. And I'm glad you shared that passage. Well, I feel like we could go on all afternoon, but I wanted to see if there's something on your heart or one final, not final, but one thing you would like to leave our listeners with, something that has meant a lot to you, or some way that they can start to put this into practice, or whatever feels aligned or grounded for you today.
Yeah, as you asked that question, the word self-acceptance is what's bubbling up. And I'm just feeling into that word a little bit because, I think sometimes we think self-acceptance is maybe the perfect version of us. Like when it's all perfect, that's when we can self-accept or accept even a situation in our life can take the self out, just accepting. But, perfection is never the goal, and really just experiencing things as they are. So allowing ourselves to have our way of approaching things and respecting that approach, I think is what moves us. I will say what moves me towards self-acceptance is like, no, it's okay. This is my process. This is how it goes. And again, coming back to just mothering ourselves through that. So what would a good mother sort of impart to that part of us that maybe is speeding ahead or flailing around or doesn't know or doesn't feel they have time? What would a good and loving mother impart to that part of us? And so we can begin to self-accept and mother ourselves and find space and create a sacred space for ourselves inside and out.
Yes, thank you. That's so powerful.
Mm.
Well, thank you for being with me here today, and thank you for sharing your message. You can find The Pleasure of Healing, and you can book your declutter and design consultation at thepleasureofhealing.com. And I will link to that in the show notes. And I'll also share where our listeners can connect with you on Instagram. I've got all your links here. I'll include all of those in the show notes. So thank you so much. This has been such a fabulous conversation. And yeah, everybody listening, be sure to go to thepleasureofhealing.com and check out Yvonne's book and consider a declutter and design consultation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And I will say part of simplicity for me is not having all the social media. So for right now, I don't have, Facebook, LinkedIn, and a lot of media like that. I really want to connect with people more in a heart-centered way through my website and through, good old-fashioned email. So I look forward to hearing from your listeners. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. That's, practicing what you preach.
Yes,
Putting
yes.
it into practice in real life.
Yeah. Again, it's just too overstimulating, I think, sometimes having so many options and keeping track of so many things. So,
Yes, that's for
yeah.
sure. All right. Thank you so much for being
Thank you, Rachel.